In this episode, we're going to look at the concept of equivalent units and how that concept is used. Recall, as a company is incurring manufacturing costs, the purchase of raw materials is recorded in a raw materials inventory account, and then as materials, labor, and indirect costs are incurred, those costs are recorded into goods in process as the inventory is being worked on. As inventory is finished, we need to figure out how much of the cost recorded in goods in process needs to be transferred to finished goods because those costs are associated with completed units. So in order to determine the completed units costs that were accumulated in goods in process and figure out how to transfer them to finished goods, we calculate a cost per equivalent unit. And this cost per equivalent unit allows us to assign product cost to completed units so that we know how much of those costs in goods in process need to be transferred to finished goods. What is an equivalent unit? An equivalent unit is a term or a calculation that refers to the number of units that could have been completed. If all of the costs of production or all of the production efforts had only been used to produce completed units instead of some completed and some partially complete. In other words, we have two half circles. If we had used all of our production efforts instead of producing two half circles to produce whole circles, we could have produced one whole instead of two half. So two partially completed units equals one equivalent unit. If a company produced 100 partially completed units during the year, and those units are all 60% complete, we can take the number of units and multiply that by their percentage completion to get the number of equivalent units. So 100 units partially complete at 60% completion means we could have used all of our production efforts to make 60 equivalent units instead of 100 partially complete. The direct material, direct labor, and factory overhead costs that have been accumulated and recorded in the work in process, also known as the goods in process inventory account throughout the period. These costs are totaled and then divided by the number of equivalent units processed to get the cost per equivalent unit for the period. So total product costs recorded in goods in process or work in process, which are the direct materials, the direct labor, and the applied overhead, and divide that by the number of equivalent units for the period. That will give us the average cost per equivalent unit, and that will be used to assign costs to completed inventory for transferring to finished goods.